and then hopefully some minimal help from the team here in this control room on the ground if all is going well, but the team has been commanding the vehicle since about L-3 hours, so just over 2 hours ago, they've really taken command of the vehicle.
你现在看到是波音公司为往来太空站打造星际航线飞船 Starliner 研发多年，过去测验是速度失败后，今天要展开测试的画面。这一次的测试是定于美国东岸时间5月19号下午的6点54分，也就是西岸时间的3点54分，大概还有40多分钟，准备要进行试射。这一次的 Starliner 是由亚特拉斯5号火箭搭载升空，若是一切顺利，星际航线飞船将与太空站对接，然后返回地球。我们为您进行中文的直播和解说。你现在看到的是 NASA 这个现场转播的一些相关画面啊。今天这一次的试飞将运载500磅的货物到国际太空站，整个过程是透过遥测检验来测试 Starliner 的可靠性。上面是没有再有任何的太空人，不过有这个所谓的假人，就是测试的这个一个这个假的一个这个模型的人啊，上面有带了15部以上的这个遥感的监测器啊，来测试这一次的发射。这一次测试可以说是对波音公司至关重要，因为 Starliner 必须要通过这项考验，未来才有可能取得载人许可，展开载人飞行。
European Space Agency astronaut Samantha Cristoforetti. Of Roscosmos, we have Denis Matveyev, Oleg Artemyev, and Sergei Korsakov. And rounding out the crew with NASA astronauts Jessica Watkins and Kjell Lindgren. Lindgren and Hines will be monitoring Starliner's approach and docking tomorrow. After tomorrow's docking, the crew will open up the hatches the following day and formally welcome the Starliner to the station.So again, the International Space Station flight control teams are getting ready to give their go for launch.
波音公司这一次可以说是与 NASA 合作开发 Starliner 载人太空飞船啊，这个全名叫做 CST-100 Starliner 的星际航线飞船啊，最高可以容纳7名乘客，执行低地球轨道的任务。不是运载货物的时候啊，就会减少成员的人数啊。未来他们正常协助运送往来国际太空站任务时，基本上会以搭载4名乘客为主，不会做到7人。Starliner 太空飞船是采用创新的无焊缝结构基本上它可以重复使用大约10次，最长可以停靠接驳国际太空站7个月。每次任务的间隔时间为6个月，这也就是说他回来以后必须要经过一些整补、整修、检查，大概隔了6个月左右的时候才可能进行下一次的任务。Starliner 的舱内有供乘坐人员使用的无线互联网和平板电脑，可以说是属于新一代往来环地球低轨道的太空船。现在看到的是这个大的荧幕，是有关于发射现场的画面。我们来听听现场的采访。
Provider is going to mean more launches from here on the Space Coast. You know, how has Kennedy Space Center been handling this ever-growing role as a multi-user spaceport?
So it's interesting. I found a pamphlet in my dad's belongings that showed that as early as the 1970s, Kennedy was known as America's spaceport. And as you know, about 10 years ago, following the retirement of the space shuttle, we embarked
预
on a
定发射时
transformation
间
to
是
a
在
multi-user
东
spaceport. What
岸
you
时
see out here
间的
today
19
is a
号
result
下
of
午
that
6点54
transformation. And so
分，
you're
在西岸
absolutely
时
right.
间
We have an
是
awful lot
3 点
of
54
launches
分。
from here. We are a very, very busy
亚洲
spaceport.
时
We're
间
very,
则
very
是这
proud
个
of it.
20
We
号
have
的早上
over 250 agreements, close to 250 partnerships and 100 separate agreements out here today. And another just interesting fact, one of the first assets or facilities that we didn't need after the space shuttle program that we entered a partnership in is the very one that the Starliner was being built in today. So the C3PF that the Starliner was manufactured and tested in today that we're going to launch on this test flight.
你现在看到的是波音公司为星际航线飞船进行测试的画面。过去 NASA 跟波音合作开发星际航线飞船，但是过去至少2次的试飞和测验都没有取得这个预定的成果。这一次可以说是第3次展开测试。今天这次试飞将会运载500磅的货物到国际太空站，整个过程会透过遥测检验 Starliner 的可靠性。这上面带有这个假人上面连接很多传感器，在试飞的时候他们可以取得一些有用的数据，才会知道未来在真正这个载人飞行时有没有安全，有没有问题，是否安全。你在画面上看到的就是这个测试的假人他身上实际上带了至少15部的这个遥测的连接器，记载一些飞行上的数据。距离这个发射时间还有30多分钟。我们再回头来聊一下这个 Starliner 太空船是采用一种创新的无焊缝结构，它基本上可以连续使用大概10次。最长它在这个连接国际太空站的时间可以长达7个月，就是210天左右它有这样的能力可以待在这个真空的状态。每次 Starliner 的任务时间的间隔必须要有6个月，它必须要进行整补和整修和检查。这个 Starliner 是标榜说所谓现代这个太空船舱内有供乘坐人员使用的无线互联网和平板电脑。这是NASA 跟波音公司一起开发新一代往来环地球低轨道的太空船。另外 Starliner 与以前美国所有靠引力返回地球太空舱选择在海面上着陆非常不同，因为它是借着空气气垫来缓冲冲击，选择在这个沙漠也就是陆地上着陆。如果你注意的话，其实早在2014年9月，波音的 Starliner 跟 SpaceX 的 Crew Dragon， 也就是我们叫它做天龙载人太空船已经双双获得 NASA 选中，成为商业载人计划的合作伙伴。波音因此还获得联邦42亿美元的拨款。有了这笔钱，波音才展开这个 Starliner 真正的开发。在这之前都是一个设计一些这个推演纸上的作业。拿到这42亿美元的拨款以后，才开始开发整个计划。不过很可惜是过去7年我们看到 SpaceX 的天龙太空船已经早就完成试飞，并已经好几次协助 NASA 完成运载太空人和货物往来国际太空站。但波音的这一艘Starliner 载人太空飞船现在才要进行这个验收关键测试，可以说是慢了一大步。波音是透过这个一次性联邦拨款来启动星际航线太空船 Starliner 的研发计划。这也是说，任何计划延迟所产生的额外花费，波音必须要贴钱自己买单。截至 2021年第3季，就是去年的一个数据波音因为这个 Starliner 不断的延误累计支付5亿9500万的额外开支。这与 SpaceX 天龙太空船已经开始载客载货帮忙运送这个人员跟物资到国际太空站赚进好几千万美元收入来相比这个一家老牌公司跟一家新的公司一赔一赚形成强烈的对比。这也是说为什么今天这项测试对波音公司实在重要，因为波音必须要赶快完成 Starliner 的测试，开始载人飞行这才能在财务上止血，也才能与 SpaceX 竞争，争取这些快要被别人抢走的生意。你现在看的是现场转播的画面目前是在这个 Starliner 在过去开发这个一些记录画面。在解说这个 Starliner 过去研发的过程，这已经花了这个7年多甚至7、8年的时间，因为之前展开纸上作图制图作业由于先前在测试的时候是发生许多的新问题所以在第二次就上一次测试的是临时喊停等于是提早这个降落结束任务。波音公司是宣称他们取得非常有用的数据不过这个距离取得证照，未来展开这个真正的载人飞行就必须要延后，所以才有今天这一项非常重要的测试。波音必须通过这一项往返太空站的任务测试取得这个核可跟证照，未来才能真正承接运载太空人和货物往来太空站。目前这个在现场研发的一些画面这个研发的过程跟时间可以说是相当这个长，不过很可惜就是说一直碰到许多问题。那 SpaceX 民间所谓的这个新的公司这个马斯克的新公司在开发这个 Crew Dragon 就是载人的天龙太空船开发进度非常快，已经在这个去年开始已经开始载人载货。我们可以看到这个目前在研发过程的一些这个记录画面。虽然这一次没有载人可是这个你刚才透过画面可以看到新的 Starliner 这个载人飞船的内部空间实际上是相对比较大的。它如果真的满载就不载货的话，其实可以载上7人，这对太空船来说可以说是非常，而且它不但可以载7人，你会发觉它其实还有一些空间。如果大家印象有的话，就是过去在登陆月球的这个小鹰号降落的这个太空艇挤上这个2人去降落，以及在环绕月球飞行的时候，上面太空船是这个3人都是非常挤的空间，不要说是转身了，根本连伸伸手臂都很困难。那新的 Starliner 这个太空飞船呢，是新的设计，舱内还会有这无线的互联网，还可以使用平板电脑， 所以是最新的这种太空飞船。目前还在静待这个发射时间，距离发射还有这个25分钟。
Starliner looks great. Myself and our other astronaut, Sonny Williams, who, along with the Boeing team, who stayed up late last night getting the capsule ready. We performed comm checks back and forth to the Mission Control Center in Houston, to the Boeing Mission Control Center here in Florida at KSC. We did it all through the TDRS, which is a
我们现在在等待这个亚特拉佛罗里达州卡纳维尔角将会运载这个 Starliner 飞船进行非常重要的测试。
Well, she is anthropomorphic, not animatronic, right? So.
We did give her a high five on the way out.
You did?
我们来听听现场的解说。
She's going to get some great data for us too, especially for the launch loads and the landing loads, so that we know that it's going to be great for humans to go fly.
We have a question for Mike Fink now. Why does NASA need 2 commercial crew providers?
We can't keep all of our eggs in one basket, and I think some of the words that we've been saying in the past couple of days is dissimilar redundancy. In other words, we have another way to go up besides the SpaceX and the Crew Dragon, and it's dissimilar. So we're not using the same rocket or the same capsules. So if there's something wrong with one, we can still have a chance to continue our continuous human presence aboard the International Space Station, and it allows NASA to not worry about the launches and landings for space station flights, so we can focus on going to the moon and beyond.
Butch, how does an uncrewed test flight, which is autopilot, as you know, prepare you for your flight test, where you're going to be doing some of the manual flying of Starliner?
Yeah, I tell you, it is uncrewed, and we are very jealous about that, but because this is human spaceflight after all, right? But this is a normal progression. This is a test evolution, right? This is experimental developmental spaceflight test. And as you go through, we're testing on the ground, as you know, all the different various systems. We're in the simulator testing software, hardware, and of course, this is, like I said, the normal progression. So we'll go through the processes to go all the way to launch, rendezvous and dock, undock, fly around, return to Earth, and entry, descent, and landing, and all of that. And we learn an immense amount through all of those processes that are beneficial as we go forward, because like you said, we do have also flight test objectives to certify this spacecraft that we'll be doing when we have the crewed mission, which will be next, you know, hopefully 6 months or so. So we'll get there eventually, but we have to get this one done first to make sure that we are in line for that crewed mission.
Mike, how does a mission to low Earth orbit help with missions to deep space?
Yes, so I was really lucky. When I came here in 1996, we didn't have a space station yet, and with the International Space Station, we've learned how to live in orbit. We've been able to work on some technologies such as our life support systems and other things, and how to keep humans living in space for long periods of time. And then that'll help us when we go to the moon and Mars and other places, because we know how to live in space, not just visit like we did in the early parts of the program. So it's a natural progression.
All right, very good. And you know what? You guys were both out there at the pad, and we have proof of it. We're going to throw up a picture. There you guys are in front of the rocket. That's a nice shot.
I think, Butch, you're a little taller.
Yeah, a little taller.
Hey, we want to thank you both for being with us. Really appreciate your time. We'll let you get back on console.
Outstanding. Thank you.
Thank you. Go Starliner.
All right, the 45th Space Wing just wrapped up a weather briefing with the launch team. Let's bring back in Weather Officer Brian Cizik to talk about what was discussed. Brian, Will Ulrich gave that briefing, your fellow launch weather officer. Any updates there?
Yes, he did. Weather continues to look really good. As you mentioned, we just heard that brief from my colleague Will Ulrich, the lead launch weather officer on this mission, and weather continues to look very favorable as we head closer and closer to T0. So here's a little bit of a different look. Earlier, we looked at satellite. Now let's take a live look at the radar. There's complex 41 and a 10 nautical mile ring around the pad that we're concerned about in terms of weather. And the one feature that you'll notice here, this squiggly line, that's actually the leading edge of the sea breeze pushing in, and that can often be a trigger for showers and thunderstorms in the summertime and late spring as we're in right now. But notice really nothing going on across central Florida, and that's all thanks to those high upper-level cirrus clouds really limiting the stability in the atmosphere. So we remain go for weather and a 90% probability of remaining go as we head into T0. Guys, back to you.
Fantastic update. Thank you very much. Brian Cizik, Launch Weather Officer with the 45th Space Wing. Now we're getting down to money time.
I know. The launch conductor is also talking to his team, and we want to carry that moment live for you.
Bravo has
So let's go back over to Lauren and Dylan at the Atlas Spaceflight Operations Center.
Yeah, Dee, we are waiting to hear the spacecraft poll
ahead.
as well as the launch
Yes, sir,
vehicle
we
poll,
verified.
which will be coming up here shortly. But in the meantime, I want to tell you about some of the preps that have been going on with our team over the last month. Our team has been cycling through Starliner's isolation valves every few days since it was fueled up about 20 days ago, and that has continued while the spacecraft has been out at the launch complex. Just a few hours ago, they also cycled through one last time, meaning they made sure each valve opened and closed with no problem, and everything went well, and we are ready to fly. And they also just a few minutes ago were able to open the valves, and those will remain open through launch. So we are good to go on all of that. Our teams have worked as well on the mission elapsed timer since OFT1 to ensure that it operates nominally today and during future flights. And before we came on the air, the spacecraft and launch vehicle were synchronized with the mission elapsed
现
time
在在画
at
面
L
上
minus
的
3
是这
hours.
个
That will be done
Starliner
again
准
during the
备
terminal
要
count,
发射
and the
前
flight director
一个
will
远眺
verify
的
it
画
once we
面。
get into ascent.
这一次
Now
Starliner
again, in
是
just a few minutes, we are
经由
expecting the
这个
Starliner readiness poll.
亚特拉斯5
Let's take a
号
live look now inside
运载
the
升
Boeing
空。
Mission Control Center. That is where that poll will come from, and it is a
这
very
是目
short
前在
poll.
控制中
We will
心
hear
的
the
一些
spacecraft launch
画面，
conductor Louis Atchison poll people inside that room in charge of
可以看到动员
propulsion
相当多
and
的
power
人力。
and many other
这跟一
subsystems.
般新
We
创
will
公
hear
司
3
甚至是
calls. One of those
SpaceX
calls
他
will
们在
come
发
from the
射
mission
时的
support
人
room
力相比
manager or the
可以说是
MSR,
多
and
出
that's
很
because
多。
after launch, this room actually turns into mission support as things shift over to Houston. So they are there to have their back of their colleagues over in Houston. We will also hear from the spacecraft test conductor during that poll, who monitors our power
这一次
systems.
发射
And
预
the third
定
call
是
will come
排
from the
在
flight director over in mission
不
control.
到20分钟之
So
后，
we are
也就
expecting
是
that
东岸
poll
时间
to
的
happen
6
here
点
pretty
54
soon,
分
and I
要
think we
进行
will
发射。
stay quiet for just
通
a
常这个
moment
波音
and
跟
listen in
NASA
for
的
that
这个
poll.
发射时间是相对准时。通常除非是因为有特殊的原因临时喊停，
Flight
延
STC
后到
MSR
下一
Manager,
个
this is
窗口
Click on
进
Launch
行
Up.
发
This
射。
time we'll
基
conduct
本
our
上他们的
CST-100
这
poll
个
for terminal
进
count.
行发
Report
射的
readiness
这
to
个
support
延迟
terminal
的
count
时
when
间可以说
prompted.
是非
MSR
常
Manager.
短，不会
MSR is ready.
像一般小型新创公司啊，就是不断的延后发射、调整发射时
Let it
间。
go. CST-100 is proceeding with final configuration for launch. All operators monitor LCCs and report any LCC violations to your operations leads. SMD, Slick, launch ops.
SMD.
CST-100 is ready for terminal count. The management poll for launch will be conducted on
我们
ULA Channel 3.
来聊一下
All
它的
minus 8 minutes.
研发的这个经费啊。
SMD comes.
波音这一次是透过一次性的联邦拨
Dylan,
款
can you talk to us a little
才
bit more
开
about
启
the
了
Go
星
for
际航
Launch
线
poll
太
that we're
空
waiting to hear
船
now?
Starliner 的
Sure,
研
Lauren.
发
So
计
those,
划。
once that polling is done, the
早
next
在
big poll is going to
2014
be coming
年
up
的
at
9
minus
月
8 minutes. Is the
，Starliner
Mission
跟这
Management
个
Team poll that's going to be
SpaceX
conducted right next
的
door to us in the
Crew
Mission Director
Dragon
Center.
天龙载人太空
And
船
that will be
都
ULA
被
launch
NASA
director
选中
Lou
成为
Mangieri,
商
who's
业
going to
载
collect
人
those
计
from the
划的
spacecraft
合
mission
作伙
director
伴。
and ULA
这个
Director of
商业载
Engineering
人
in
计划
preparation for
主要就是
providing
说
the final
透过
permission to
民间公
launch
司
to Chief
来
Launch Conductor Doug Lebo at the
开
end of our
发
terminal count
新的
status
载
check.
人太空船啊，可以
All
在
right,
这个
Dylan.
太
Well,
空
we
梭
are
停
just
止飞
about
行任
17
务后
minutes away，from
帮助
launch.
NASA
We will now toss
能
it
够
over to
运
our
载
colleagues
太空
Josh
人
and
跟货
Brandy
物
in
到
Houston.
国际太空站，有点像是有人说是太空的计程车吧，就是来来回回将来载人载
I
货。
feel like we've said the word pull a whole
那
lot just now because
Starliner
it is
呢
this point in the countdown
获
when
得
a whole lot of pulls
联邦
happen.
42亿
Actually,
拨款，不
Flight
过
Director Mike
计
Lammers
划
pulled
不
his
断的
team
延
right
后，
before he reported
造成这
into
个
our
波音巨
spacecraft
大的
launch
财务
conductor
负担哦。
Louis Atchison back in
截
the
至这个去年的
PMCC.
第三季
I can't
波
help
音
smiling
已经
because
因为
we're all good right
Starliner
now.
累
It
计
is
支
very
付了
quiet
5亿
here in Mission Control.
9500万元
From
的
here
额
on
外
out,
开支啊。
console operators
这
will be
个
monitoring
协
what's
一个
known
相
as
当
their
巨
launch
大的
commit
花费。
criteria, or LCCs, and their flight rules. Now, those are very long, very involved documents that basically just list the parameters that the spacecraft and the rocket
啊，
have
你
to
可以
be
看
in
到这
to
个
go to flight. That
许多
is
这个不同控
including
制中
both
心，因
redundant
为
and
这次
primary
是
systems. We want
NASA 波
everything
音
on Starliner working before we go
进
fly
行这
today.
个
And right now
合作
everything
开
seems to be
发，
working. So
所以这个
we're
控
in
制
a
的
good
中心
countdown
有
right now.
好几个。
That's right. There are just a few
除
more
了这个
milestones to
NASA
get
本
through
身，
before
波音
launch.
公司
One
也
coming
设
up
置
in the
了
next
这个
minute
飞
or
行
so
控制
is
中心。
the switching of Starliner from external to internal power. At that point, the spacecraft will be on battery power from there on out. But for the most part, the team here is just watching, waiting, and standing ready for a launch. Now 15 minutes away.
距离这个预定的发射时间还有15分38秒左右。
Brandy and
现在
Josh,
是
thank
现
you,
场
and we'll see you
转
then.
播的一些画面，
NASA is relying on Boeing and several
可以
other providers.
看到这个NASA 对于这一次的这个试射可以说相当重视啊，不但有户外的转播现场，不同的几个采访现场，还有棚内的进行转播的摄影棚哦。
gives us more resilience. It allows us to do even more science. And I think as a former shuttle astronaut, at a time when there were only 2 human spacecraft that were available in the entire world, and now we have more, and that means more people can go to space. And the innovation that happens at the space station is just so exciting to think about.
Yeah, I love how you light up when you talk about this, because tell me, I mean, it's so important to sustain this permanent presence in space, right?
It's incredibly important. We hope to go out into the solar system with humans to do science and to explore. And those are really long trips. So we really need to understand how to live and operate in space. The International Space Station is providing critical technologies that we are testing to go onto the moon and out to Mars and even beyond.
Right.
But in addition to that, what we've really found is that having a lab allows us to have more innovation.
Yeah.
So the shuttle only flew 5, 6, 7 times a year for about.
在现场的采访跟问答中哦，是强调说未来想要深度开发太空的一些这个科研，先必须要了解在太空中生活的一些状态。所以国际太空站也好，或是来往太空站的太空载具也好，在研发上都变得是相当重要。在右边这个大图是这个远距的画面。目前距离发射预定的时间呢，不到这个13分钟，现在是12分57秒左右。
Really, that's what the crew is looking for. They're looking for what worked, what we need to continue to work on. That is actually the meaning of a test flight.
你现在看到的是星际航线飞船 Starliner 准备试射的画面。波音公司为往来太空站打造的星际航线飞船 CST-100 Starliner 已经研发多年，但过去试验几度都遭遇挫折。现在是定于这个东岸时间5月19号下午6点54分，也就是10多分钟以后，要由这个亚特拉斯5号火箭运载升空。若是一切顺利，经过一段这个长时间的飞行星际航线飞船在星期5的时候会接近这个国际太空站。然后等到第二天就是星期6早上，在对接完成以后，这个太空站上的太空人会打开这个舱门。这一次虽然没有载人，但是有运载500磅的货物，主要是一些设备跟一些补给运到这个太空站上。
quite slowly today, but Dylan, if it needed to in case of an emergency, it could really get out of there pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's right, Lauren. And I just heard the command get given to start the crew access arm retraction. But that crew access arm rotates 120 degrees back to the crew access tower. It takes just under 2 minutes to do, but it can be redeployed in about 15 seconds in the event of an emergency.
目前大家还在等待这个试射啊。
All right. And we do want to let you know that after liftoff, Dylan will do the flight dynamics from here in the ASOC. Then Brandy and Josh
我们前面也提到，这个 Starliner 与以前美国所有靠这个地球引力返回地球的太空船啊，选择在海面上着陆啊，非常不一样。因为 Starliner 会借着空气气垫作为这个缓冲啊，选择是在这个沙漠，也就是陆地上着陆。
We will be able to take a look at and know exactly what's happening with the spacecraft when video is not possible as it moves through the dynamic phases of flight. So we are coming up on L-10, getting very close here, and we are now waiting to hear the next call, which will be to verify that Starliner is on internal power, and we were going to listen into the loops for just a few seconds.
目前距离发射时间大约是10分半。
Flight verify CST-100 on internal power. Verified.
对不起，不到10分钟，现在是9分50秒左右。透过画面可以看到这个连接的这个通道目前已经移开，可以说是距离发射越来越近。
Shift a bit, but not for us today. We have a launch window that we have to go right on the dot, and that is because we wait to launch till the orbital path for the ISS aligns up with the Space Coast and with Central Florida. And then once we get up into orbit, Starliner essentially plays a game of catch-up with the space station. It just works to catch right up to it and eventually reaches the same speed of more than 17,500 miles an hour.
"距离预定发射时间还有8分50秒。
Everything is looking good, and the silence is golden at the moment.
Yeah, we're about 38 seconds now away from the mission management poll that I spoke about earlier, and that will lead up to the terminal count status check coming up here at L-7.
Flight verify ordnance configured for launch. Verified.
And Starliner's ordnance is configured for launch now. That basically means that the devices that initiate our separation events are ready to support both nominal and contingency operations that happen or could happen during the ascent profile.
L-8 minutes.
We are 8 minutes to launch.
您现在收看的是波音公司所研发星际航线飞船准备展开重要测试的画面。
LC arm control. Go ahead. First step 260.
这次太空飞船是透过这个联合发射联盟亚特拉斯5号，这也是这个波音公司跟其他公司合作开发的这个发射的一个子公司哦，也是过去这几十年来这个主要负责美国太空发射的一家这个民营企业。
Status check to proceed with terminal count. Atlas systems, propulsion, go. Hydraulic, go. Pneumatic, go. LO2, go. Water, go.
我们在画面上前后已经看到了3个不同的行控中心，有火箭行控中心，有这个波音研发 Starliner 的行控中心，还有这个 NASA 本身的控制中心。 可以看到是牵扯多少的人力啊，在这一次的这个发射跟运行。哇，时间很紧张，现在这个距离预定发射时间只有6分15秒。许多行控中心的人员呢，并不是发射完成以后就没事，因为他经过这个10几20个小时的飞行之后，要在星期5才会迫近国际太空站，然后跟国际太空站进行这个重要的对接。届时我们也会为您转播这个对接是否成功的画面。然后等到礼拜6，太空站的太空人才会打开这个Starliner 的舱门啊，希望从中间取得重要的科研器具跟补给。基本上这个 Starliner 会跟这个太空站连接5天之后，然后进行重返地球。预定是降落在这个陆地，也就是沙漠当中。这也是美国主要太空飞船呢，第一次是选择这个陆地上来降落。
LC flight, Starliner configured for terminal count. Roger.
There you go. Starliner is now configured for terminal count.
L minus 4 minutes and 45 seconds. All steps are complete prior to terminal count.
And Lauren, with that call, that all of the work is now complete, and the computers are going to take over the automated countdown.
你现在看到的是这个远眺的画面。
L minus 4 minutes and 30 seconds.
Just a beautiful shot there.
位于美国东南的佛罗里达州卡纳维尔角一直是重要太空载具发射以及进行这个太空科研的重要基地。
On my mark, the time will be T minus 4 minutes and counting. 3, 2, 1, mark. 3:55. Ground pyros enabled.
Ground system ordnance has been enabled.
我们可以看到火箭的燃料填充完成在进行这个发射前最后的确认。现在距离预定发射时间只有3分37秒。
3:30. Atlas hydraulics at flight pressure.
Atlas's hydraulic steering system has been pressurized for flight.
$3分钟。
3 minutes to launch.
Securing LO2 topping. Pressurizing Atlas tanks.
Topping of liquid oxygen in the Atlas has now completed, and Atlas propellant tanks are pressurizing for flight.
你可以看到是这个发射场各个角度的不同画面。我们前面说过，这一次的计划可以说是不断的这个延宕已经拖了相当长的时间，所以今天的这一次试飞可以说是非常重要。距离发射时间2分钟。
1:59. Vehicle internal. 1:55. Bot sequencer start. 1:50.
Securing Centaur LH2.
Securing Centaur LO2.
Centaur hydrogen and oxygen are now at flight level, and topping is being terminated.
1:40. Launch enabled. 1:37. STS arm.
好的，您现在收看的是这个 Starliner 飞船进行试飞的重要画面。现在距离预定发射时间只有1分10秒。
EDS armed and ready means the emergency detection system is now armed. And that basically just means
这 Starliner 的功用啊，主要有点像太空计程车开发起来最主要是要运送太空人和货物往来地球跟这个国际太空站。特别是在太空梭这个停止运行之后啊，过去国际太空站有许多的货物跟人员往来。是借由这个俄罗斯的联盟号太空船帮助他们运载到太空上。
25 status check. Go Atlas. Go Centaur. Go Starliner.
All systems are go for liftoff.
Go Starliner. Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Starliner is headed back to space on the shoulders of Atlas, powered by a workforce dedicated to its success.
We have confirmation of a good MET epic timer on Starliner.
Atlas executed its roll program.
Already ready is now throttling down to maintain acceptable dynamic pressure on the
crew on board today.
This is the first planned throttle down for Atlas in preparation for max Q.
Max Q, maximum dynamic pressure on the
Right now, atmospheric forces are the highest Starliner Atlas will face during the uphill climb.
Mach 1, Atlas 5 and Starliner are now supersonic. Vehicle now throttling up.
Up next in about 20 seconds, Starliner's 2 solid rocket boosters will run out of fuel and burn out.
接下来火箭要进行这个脱离哦。目前火箭已经升空这个。
And we have burnout on both SRBs.
Good crew module forward link connection.
Already ready is throttling back up to full thrust.
Now that we pass the solid rocket booster burnout, you'll soon see those 2 solid rocket boosters separate from the vehicle.
Atlas 5 now weighs just 1/2 of what it did at launch, burning propellant at a rate of 2,800 pounds per second. And we have indication of SRB jettison.
可以看到这个固态火箭的
Atlas continues to ascend using solely the RD-180 engine. That's about 850,000 pounds of thrust at sea level.
RD ready is throttling down slightly as expected. Engine response looks good.
Teams here on the ground confirming Starliner has a good trajectory. We're now 2 minutes and 55 seconds into today's flight, flying at an altitude of 56 kilometers.
Our next throttle down will be to control acceleration forces, limit forces on the crew to below 4 Gs. That is safe for an extended period of time.
1 minute remaining in this burn. 1 minute to BECO. Archimedes now throttling to maintain 3.5 G acceleration on the vehicle.
Starliner flying off the East Coast at this point at altitude of 80 kilometers now, moving at a rate of 1,187 miles per hour.
It's just passing North Carolina and Virginia off the northeastern seaboard. For those of you watching along the coastline, you might be able to see this launch.
目前这个火箭是沿着这个东部的海岸线在飞行啊。刚才转播人员说，如果你是在东部的话，抬头仰望天空，也许有机会看到这个火箭。
We have BECO, booster engine cutoff.
接下来这个火
We
箭
have successful staging.
第二节
Pre-start on the RL-10s.
头部的整流罩也脱离哦。
We have ignition on both RL-10s.
目前看起来一切都进行还算顺利。
Centaur's now gone to closed loop steering.
Just passed through several milestones. Teams here on the ground reporting that all are looking good. Ascent cover jettison there. That provided that aerodynamic structure to the top of Starliner, protected the docking equipment during ascent.
And now that Starliner and Centaur are free of the atmosphere, well into the vacuum of space, that aeroskirt has been jettisoned.
Now 6 minutes into today's launch, Starliner continuing to accelerate up the North American coast. Everything going smoothly so far. Starliner and Centaur have been ticking through their ascent milestones right on track, including the booster stage separation, Centaur ignition, and aeroskirt jettison. A number of status calls we'll be listening for in the next several minutes, but if all continues to go well, the next major milestone to watch out for is the main engine cutoff, when Starliner will be officially in space.
We heard a report from ULA's team. We had a little bit of an overperformance on the booster, but that's a good thing. Centaur is more than capable of adjusting on the fly in its closed loop performance.
Centaur pressures are stable. Centaur looks good.
目前所有的遥测数据都算正常。
Flight control teams are also monitoring the performance of the sublimator on Starliner right now. The sublimator is what is used to control cabin temperatures going up to space and coming home. Normally we use the radiators on the service module, but those are not powered up until we get into orbit.
"你现在在画面上看到的是飞行的示意图哦，这是预先做好的一个动画。显示目前
We heard confirmation that St. John's abort zone is open. We pre-select these splashdown zones in the case of any needed aborts. The first one would be off the coast of St. John's, Nova Scotia.
接下来阶段就是
We just heard the flight dynamics officer report everything is pretty good.
Main engine cut off 的一个指令。
Flight controllers here in Mission Control confirming that our main engine cutoff time is looking stable. It is going to be 11 minutes and 50 seconds into the flight. We are now 8 minutes and 50 seconds in, so that's still about 3 minutes to go until we hit that milestone.
还有几分钟的时间，会进入下一个重要阶段。您现在看到的是波音公司与 NASA 合作研发 Starliner 进行重要试飞的画面。目前这个火箭已经升空超过9分25秒。下一个阶段就是这个引擎切断就是引擎停止运作。然后 Starliner 是会进入
Now, one of the next calls that we will hear is that the Shannon abort zone will be open. Now, you can see on your screens that Starliner is making its way up the North American coast, just starting to go into the Atlantic Ocean, Northern Atlantic Ocean. We pre-plan our flight trajectories, so we would not aboard a crew into the middle of the ocean. They'd be near enough to land for quick and speedy recovery. So we're still in that St. John's abort zone. Expect to hear that Shannon open call coming.
And we just heard that call. Shannon now open, so Starliner could potentially make that abort landing off the coast of Ireland now if needed, but so far no reason to think it will be. Starliner currently 153 kilometers above the Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, and that's about 95 miles.
可以看到这个目前飞行的轨迹，这个飞行载具是沿着美国这个东岸的往北在飞行。
60 seconds to MECO.
下一个主要阶段是 MECO 在这个飞行管制数。
We are 11 minutes into today's flight. Centaur and Starliner are passing Mach 23, Mach 23.3 and counting. Altitude of just under 150 kilometers.
MECO's main engine cutoff when both of the dual engine Centaur RL-10s are scheduled to shut down. That again is coming up at 11 minutes and 50 seconds, about 5 seconds away now.
And we have MECO 1.
准时主引擎按照预定的季度是
Centaur engines have cut off. RCS is now at
main
100%
engine cut
for
off,
SL.
right on time. Starliner is in space, but not done with the ascent milestones. Hearing in the room that it was a good main engine cut off. The next milestone that we'll be looking for is launch vehicle separation, when Starliner will separate from Centaur booster and fly on its own. Even after that happens, we'll have about 15 minutes until our final major milestone in today's ascent, the orbital insertion burn that will raise the perigee, or low point of Starliner's orbit, out of the Earth's atmosphere. So stick with us, we're not done yet. Now 12 minutes and 30 seconds into today's flight.
We just heard our Atlas console position report a spacecraft separation for 1450 after launch.
Still about 2 minutes away.
Now, right now, ULA teams are confirming that Centaur is in a good configuration for separation, making sure that all of the pressures in the tanks are stable and it will be able to conduct a proper disposal burn later. Flight control teams here in the room are moving to their insertion checklists.
下一个非常重要的关键就是这个推进器与这个 Starliner 要进行分离大概估计在14分钟不到15分钟之间会进行。
60 seconds to spacecraft SIP. Centaur has now achieved its separation attitude.
Just under a minute now to go until the launch vehicle separation. The team here on the ground reporting that Starliner and Centaur are both ready for it in the right orientation and on a stable trajectory.
"30 seconds to Starliner separation."
预计在14分50秒左右，Starliner 要跟推进器进行分离。
Centaur is holding attitude for Starliner separation. 10 seconds to separation.
这是非常重要的关键。
And we have confirmation of Starliner separation.
哇！现在终于收到这个获得确认哦。目前这个
And Starliner is flying alone
这个推进器
on its way to orbit.
进行分离。
Confirm good LV separation. Thanks ULA for a smooth ride to space, and thank you Dylan for your help on that ascent commentary.
现在完全是 Starliner 自己的事了啊。
That milestone behind us, the next one we'll be watching for is that orbital insertion burn. That is going to raise the perigee, or the low point, of Starliner's orbit out of the Earth's atmosphere, putting it in space for its full orbit. That's an important milestone to reach. It's going to be a 45-second burn. It'll change Starliner's velocity about 85 meters per second, or 190 miles per hour. And that's going to be coming up at the 31-minute mark in today's orbit. We're now just under 16 minutes into today's flight, so still about 15 minutes to go for that.
So there's a number of things that flight controllers are working on right now. They're transitioning Starliner from its launch mode over to its orbit mode. That includes powering up things like antennas, heaters, and those radiators that I mentioned earlier.
现在这个阶段，我们刚刚听到这个播报员特别强调
We have good targeting for orbital insertion, a good forward command link, and a good MET epoch timer.
变成这个低轨道飞行的模组，所以一些这个
Starliner making its way over the North Atlantic.
电力设备啊，跟天线
Some other things going on right now. They are powering down some what's called demonstration flight instrumentation. We have some extra sensors on there for these demonstration flights. We have more of them on during power descent, but we don't need some of those right now, so flight controllers are powering some of those down. But some other things that are powering on include those propulsion line heaters. When in the vacuum of space and in the Earth's shadow, it gets quite cold, around negative 250 degrees, so we want to make sure those propulsion lines don't freeze. And the radiators are those little small silver discs you might be able to see on the side of the service module. If you remember your high school physics, the only way you can get rid of heat in a vacuum is through radiation. And so that sublimator will be powering down, and the radiators will be taking care of the heat management for the rest of the flight until we get ready to come home. Some things that you also might be seeing on your screen are some RCS jet activations. Those are just helping the target for that orbital insertion burn. And at about L+23, the team will transition Starliner into what's called fine pointing mode, or thrust align mode. So those jets that you see firing will hold a very specific attitude, which is exactly the attitude that we need for that orbital insertion burn, as Brandy mentioned earlier. We want that 85 meters per second of delta V to be going in exactly the right direction. And so the colors you're seeing on your screen,
Right. The colors you're seeing on the screen are indicating Starliner's track right now. Starliner is currently coming up on the coast of Europe and is about 224 miles 139 miles, 224 kilometers above the Atlantic Ocean as it makes its way to the topmost or highest part of this orbit. It will be heading southeast over Europe and a little bit of Africa in the next few minutes as it begins its journey to start catching up with the International Space Station. Again, one of the major milestones coming up in preparation for that is the orbital insertion burn, coming up at 31-minute mark into today's flight. We're now just over 19 minutes in.
它将飞越这欧洲以及这非洲的上空。目前距离起飞超过19分钟。
Confirmation, we still have a good forward link command connection.
Getting a look at the number of teams who have been supporting today's launch all across the U.S., in particular here in Houston. If you hear of the flight director Mike Lammers and Rick Hempling, who's been assisting him, particularly with weather observations. And earlier you saw several of the teams who have been supporting from the launch site in Florida. Now 21 minutes into today's flight. That's just about 10 minutes away from that orbital insertion burn that we're watching for. It's coming up at 31 minutes into the flight.
再过10分钟左右，太空船会为了进入这个预定的轨道，再次进行这个校正的点火。
So we're about a minute away before the flight controllers put Starliner into its thrust align mode. Once again, just making sure that Starliner is pointed exactly at the right attitude for that orbital insertion burn. It's going to hold that attitude. It is otherwise very quiet on the flight control loops, which, as Lauren said earlier, silence is golden. Guidance Navigation Control Officer confirmed that Starliner is moving towards that OI attitude and will begin holding for orbital insertion.
With that, we're going to take a minute to pause and toss it back to Lauren in Florida, who I believe has a special guest there to talk with before they wrap up their coverage for the day. Lauren?
Hey, Brandy, thank you very much. Yes, joining me now is NASA astronaut Sunny Williams. Thank you so much for being here, Sunny.
Thanks. It's great to be here today.
And I know you've been following along. I've actually been able to see you from my perspective up here. I saw you in the moment of liftoff. You had your game face on. What was going through your mind at that moment?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Actually, leading up to this, I've been thinking about all the teams all over the country who are supporting this, of course, here in Florida, but then back in Houston and Denver. It's just a huge team to get this thing off the ground and to get Starliner into flight. So at the moment of liftoff, I have to admit, though, I was thinking about what it's like to be sitting inside of there. So, unabashed to just imagine what it will be like for the next launch when we have people riding in Starliner and this Atlas V being a human-rated rocket. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, we heard the guys earlier saying they were jealous about Rosie.
Absolutely.
Well, just a few months ago, we were talking about how much confidence you have in the Atlas V rocket. And what made you say that?
Yeah, we've been here a couple times watching launches, of course, not only for Starliner, for OFT the first time around, but also for other payloads that have gone up on the Atlas V. And, they're pretty expensive. I told my mom at one point in time, if they're putting that expensive payload on top of that rocket, I feel pretty good about that. And I know the team, I've been here, talked to a lot of people who have worked on this, this rocket, both here, Decatur, for example, as well in Denver. And I understand the engineering, or at least I tried to understand the engineering that goes into this complex machine, and they are A plus people doing just such a great job. So I know that their hearts are with us and ready to launch humans into space.
Well, we are waiting for that orbital insertion burn. It is a very important milestone for Starliner. What are you watching for here?
Yeah, we just want to make sure that that burn goes off without a flaw. We get circularized around the planet, and then we can all take a deep breath and let the spacecraft fly for a little bit and get ready for the rendezvous profile for the ISS. So I think that is really what we're waiting for, just to make sure it's going to happen correctly, which, all indications are great. The spacecraft is working well.
Now, Sunny, I see you at the office quite often. I see the guys at the office quite often. You guys really have worked closely with the people who have their hands on this spacecraft day in and day out. What does that relationship mean to you?
It's huge. Like I mentioned, during the days leading up to this, I really was just thinking about the teams, all of the hard work that they've gone, into getting the spacecraft ready to go, as well as getting this rocket ready to go. I know ULA has done a lot of work leading up to this after the last attempt, and this relationship is so key. I feel like I just want to stay committed to them to make sure that we get to the finish line with getting people to the International Space Station.
And so as soon as you guys finish up here tonight, then what happens? Where are you going next?
Oh, heading back to Houston. Mission Control in Houston right now has the spacecraft, and we want to watch the rendezvous profile. We're also, all three of us are sort of sitting in the shoes of, or in the seat of Rosie, wondering what it's going to be like and what the spacecraft is going to see, how it's going to act in all of that rendezvous profile. So we'll be right there following along. So it's going to be an exciting 24 hours. I'm racing back. I'll be home tonight to be able to be in Mission Control in some capacity watching, just like here, watching that rendezvous profile.
And can you tell us much about what would happen between now and crewed flight? What kind of training do you have to go through, and what kind of things are we going to be working on with Starliner?
Right. So this mission is going to prove, we're going to learn stuff. Not everything is going to go 100% correct, right? We learn stuff every time we take something to space. And so we're going to take those lessons learned from this mission and apply it to the next launch, which is the crewed flight test. But even beside for that, we have testing that we're ready to go do. We have the crew validation test, which is coming up this summer, where the three of us will be in the spacecraft, in the suits, in the seats, checking out the environmental control system, checking out the ergonomics, making sure we fit, we're ready to go. We also be working with the software folks, so looking at all the displays, making sure that all the displays tell us the right information and we understand it correctly, and we can work with Mission Control with that. So there's a lot. And then, of course, there's training with the control team. The control team, we've had some training with them, but leading up to this, they've been working on an uncrewed version, and now us little pains in the neck are going to be sitting in there talking back to them. So we're going to work through all that choreography of how we're going to work together in the spacecraft.
Well, Sunny, your time is valuable. I really appreciate you joining us here. I know you need to get back down to the console and follow along. So thank you for being here. And we are going to continue to follow along the loops here at the ASOC and wait for that orbital insertion burn, which is basically when Starliner will be up in orbit, hanging out until we're ready to start the rendezvous process and docking tomorrow. So for now, that's it for me and Sunny, and as well as Dylan Rice here in Florida. And we'll get you back over to Brandy and Josh in Houston.
Thanks so much, Lauren. And great to hear from Sunny. We're now just about 2 minutes away from the orbital insertion burn. That, again, is going to be a 45-second burn. It's going to raise the perigee of, or the low point of Starliner's orbit out of the Earth's atmosphere and get it into a stable orbit. And after that, we'll begin checking out the critical control systems before tomorrow's docking.
距离这个校正点火不到1分钟的时间。
Minute and a half until the orbital insertion burn. Starliner is in the burn attitude. You might have seen earlier the nose of Starliner might have been pointed down towards the Earth, but that's actually the attitude that it needs to be, because as it orbits around the Earth, it will no longer be pointing at Earth. It will be pointing at that specific point in space that the orbital insertion burn will send us to. And once again, there'll be a lot of thruster activity. We want those 4 aft-facing OMAC engines, that's about 1,200 pounds of thrust each, to be pushing in exactly the right direction.
OMAC standing for Orbital Maneuvering and Attitude Control. They're going to fire for 45 seconds for this burn, changing Starliner's velocity by 85 meters per second or 190 miles per hour. 30 seconds to go now until that burn ignites.
目前看起来，所有的这个运作跟这个进行都按照计划。3, 2, 1.
Again, this burn is going to last for 45 seconds. Teams here on the ground reporting 4 good orbital maneuvering and attitude control thrusters.
现在要校正，然后进入预定的轨道。
Now the colors you're seeing on those jets, or you were seeing on those jets, they indicate which integrated propulsion controller those jets are mapped to. We have 3 IPCs, integrated propulsion controllers. OI cutoff in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And we have OI cutoff. And we have confirmation from Flight Director Mike Lammers. We have a good orbital insertion burn. Starliner is in a stable circular orbit on its way to the International Space Station.
哇，这个传来好消息，就是 Starliner 经过这个校正点火以后，已经进入预定的轨道，也非常成功。现在进行绕轨道的飞行。
And then after that, hopefully a very good docking. But so far today, good launch, great performance from ULA. Atlas even gave us a little bit more of a push than we needed, but Centaur was able to adjust accordingly, place Starliner exactly where we needed it. And we have confirmation of a good OI burn. Once again, Starliner is in orbit, heading to the ISS.
It's a major milestone to get behind us, but it is really just the beginning. We've got a number of demonstrations now that Starliner will have to go through ahead of its International Space Station arrival. Those are going to start pretty much right away with a checkout of the VESTA systems. VESTA stands for Vision-Based Electro-Optical Sensory Tracking Assembly. They're basically sensors that take measurements that Starliner uses for relative navigation. Starliner has 2 of them, and each contains 4 sensors: a camera with a narrow view, a camera with a wide view, an infrared camera, and a LiDAR unit that uses laser to detect range.
Just a couple more things they're working through on their orbital insertion checklist. We have confirmation good radiator activation. So those radiators are now in control and controlling the thermal environment inside the cabin. And going back a little bit, just to help you guys learn a little bit about Starliner, going back to those IPCs, that blue, green, and red is what propulsion controller each of those thrusters are mapped to. So if you think of the flight controllers like the brain of Starliner, the IPCs are kind of like the nervous system, translating kind of those commands into movement. So we'll see the team continue to exercise those throughout the flight. Next up are a couple demos, but I think for now, we'll wrap up here in Houston.
That's right. With that last milestone safely behind us, we're going to say goodbye for the night. The Starliner team here in Mission Control will be monitoring continually as Starliner makes its way towards the International Space Station. Right now, Starliner is about 118 miles above the coast of Africa, heading towards the Indian Ocean.
迫近国际太空站，然后进行关键性的对接。如果届时有机会，我们将为您转播。谢谢您今天的收看。
International Space Station Flight Control Room. But that is it for Josh and I for the night. That was a great launch, and we are excited to see Starliner on its way. Gary?